A company can seize extraordinary opportunities only if it's very good at the ordinary operations. Good evening to one and all present here. I, Vanshika Mehra, along with my co-host Mridha Goyal, would like to welcome you all to the Operations Panel discussion of Sapience 2021. We would like to thank you all for gracing the event with your presence. Sapience is the annual management conclave of Great Lakes Institute of Management, Gurgaon, and it stands for great wisdom and sound judgment. The topic for Sapience 2021 is purpose-driven business in the post-pandemic world.
India's supply chain and logistics is one of the largest sector globally, with a logistic industry of USD 215 billion and growing at a CAGR of 10.5%. This growth is purpose-driven, which is getting more and more important in the business world and is beneficial to the consumers as well. It's very clearly linked to brand growth and business results. Business leaders and marketers must put purpose at the heart of what they do, not just to make the world a better place, but to engage with the demands of people who buy from you and to strengthen your brand as well. Operations have always given organizations the power to act and to create value for the customers and capture value for the stakeholders. Both combined allows the organization to know exactly what to do daily, get the job done consistently, and improve as well.
Now, I would like to invite Professor S.K. Palhan, the founder director of our institute, to welcome our esteemed panelists. Professor Palhan is an operations management professor at Great Lakes Institute of Management, Gurgaon. He holds an electrical engineering degree from IIT Kharagpur and he pursued his MBA from FMS Delhi. Sir, I request you to welcome our panelists.
Okay, it's a privilege for me to welcome the highly accomplished panelists who are going to address today. In fact, they bring a very rich experience from various areas. The quality of life in a society depends on the product and services available in peacetime as well as in times of the war and other areas. And operations are the people who make it possible. That's the importance of the people who are panelists who have come today. And Akhil Srivastava brings a rich experience of from the largest brewery in the world. Jayaraman brings the Zen technology, again from the defense area, a totally different one, but highly relevant in tough situations. And Mr. Prashant Kodagunte, again from the healthcare sectors, which again is very important. And Mr. Setu Mahadevan from Biocon, again with a very important sector dealing with the health. Actually, what happened is the operations were affected very seriously during the COVID-19. And there was stoppage in the supply chain system. There was stoppage in certain services. And interestingly, even the customer demands changed significantly in many areas. In some cases, they went up suddenly. In other areas, they went down almost to zero. So operations people had a very challenging environment. We had to go ahead with the business. And all the disruptions, in fact, I think there was hardly an industry which did not have any disruptions. And operations people had to be on the toes. And this particular sector, we have got a highly experienced people who have come to discuss the various challenges which they have faced. And I'm sure that the students and the faculty of the Great Lakes Institute of Management will benefit a lot from all the esteemed panelists. I'll keep my talk short and welcome all the panelists once again for their wisdom. Over to the MCs.
Thank you, sir. We would now introduce you to our panelists. Our first panelist is Mr. Akhil Srivastava, Director at ABN Bev. He has been working for the company for more than 2 years now and possesses experience in fields like supply chain orchestration through real-time visibility backed by IoT and AI-based decisions, material requisition planning, distribution planning footprint, and network design optimization strategy. Moreover, he has a rich experience in planning and logistics and is also a co-founder at Pure Solutions and Nebula Technologies. He is an esteemed alumnus of the Business Management program at the prestigious Stanford University Graduate School of Business and Consumer Product Marketing program at IIM Lucknow. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
We now welcome our second panelist, Mr. Jairam Mumadi, Vice President, Projects at Zen Technologies Limited. Before that, he worked at Care as the Chief Business Officer and National Operations Head at Mahindra Group. Mr. Mumadi joined the Indian Army in 1997 as Major, AGM, GM Operations and Maintenance, and served the country for 21 years, retiring as Colonel, GM at Army Base Workshop, heading operations for the overall of critical electronic equipment. Mr. Mumadi has done his BSc and BTech from JNU in ECE and MTech from IIT Kanpur in RF, microwave and photonics. He is also OEM trained in cyber electronics, operations and warfare from Thales Academy, North Carolina. I can keep listing his achievements, but I will not be able to cover all of it within the stipulated time. It's a delight to have you amongst us, sir.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
I would like to welcome our third panelist, Mr. Prashant Kodukanti, Senior Director at Optum Global Solutions. He has been working with Optum Global Solutions for more than 6 years now. Before joining his current company, Mr. Prashant worked with Genpact as an Assistant Vice President. He has experience in corporate quality, process reengineering, and also leads transformational projects for continuous growth. Mr. Prashant is an alumnus of the Executive Program on Leadership and Management, Business Administration and Management of the prestigious IIM Calcutta, and Design Thinking Program by Stanford University Graduate School of Business. It's a privilege to have you, sir.
Pleasure to be on this panel. Thank you.
We heartily welcome our fourth panelist for the evening, Mr. Sethu Madhavan, Vice President at Biocon Biologics. He has been working with Biocon for 10 years now. He was also the Global Head, Insulin Operations and Manufacturing Head at Biocon. Before Biocon, Mr. Madhavan worked for Teva API India Limited as the Associate Director and the Director, Manufacturing. He has also worked for organizations such as Ranbaxy Research Limited and Dr. Reddy Laboratories Limited. Mr. Madhavan has done his MBA in Finance and Strategy. He also has a post-graduation diploma in patent law. He has a sharp business acumen and is a good motivator. We're lucky to have him amongst us.
It's my pleasure to be in this conclave.
Allow us to introduce the moderator of today's panel, our very own Dr. Amit Karamchandani, Assistant Professor in the Operations Management area. He is a BTech graduate in Mechanical Engineering from IIT BHU and has a PhD from IIM Lucknow. Dr. Amit has 7 years of industry experience with BHEL in roles such as quality assurance and senior design. Now over to you, Amit sir.
Thank you, Vanchika, for the kind introduction. I welcome our esteemed panelists and thank them for joining us. In recent years, we have seen how the pandemic affected our lives on an individual level, as well as organizations globally. The effect of pandemic was reflected in the contraction of GDP last year. And of course, this year there is some positive recovery in the GDP, but there is scope of a lot of learning for all of us from what organizations went through and how they managed this difficult phase. So I have a few questions for the panelists, and what I will do is I will ask a question and I will invite each panelist to present their views on the same. Panelists can feel free to answer the questions based on their organizational context. So my first question is this: how operations management or supply chain management has changed for past 2 years since the pandemic? And what are the 3 major challenges that you faced in the operations due to the pandemic? And further, how do you plan to deal with them in future? So first, I will invite our first panelist, Mr. Akhil Srivastav, to present his views. And please feel free to provide any opening remarks if he would like to give.
Sure. Thanks, Amit. And thank you, everyone who have taken time on a Friday evening. The Budweiser is on me if post this. So I would go ahead saying it's not a pandemic, it's an endemic. First thing, so hope everyone is safe, because I just read a news which said Delhi found 12 more cases of COVID, people looking forward for Omicron symptoms and things like those, which means this is going to be a way of life. And hence, it's fundamental for us to figure out how do we respond to it versus react to it. 2 years in my industry, as well as I think in anyone else who has been associated, has been a more reactive phase where we were not ready for such black swan events. And hence it took us fundamentally, the mental maths to figure out that if this is an endemic, how do we survive with it? Right now, I'm seeing everyone, no one has a mask. So hopefully we are now getting attuned to the concept of obviously safety with ourselves, but more importantly, being resilient. And we want us to get back in life as quickly as possible. And that's what I think this 2 years have taught us as an industry, specifically because 3 things which Amit, you really asked, have been difficult to gauge. One is demand prediction and sensing. Second is the versatility and speed of response. And third is any other wave which might come our way, whether it's going to be wave 4, wave 3, wave 5, no one knows. So how resilient are we as a humankind or as a mankind is something which I believe I have personally learned. It has brought a lot of understanding for us as an organization, as a culture, to not react, but be proactively responsible and resilient. That's what is 2 years in a nutshell to me.
Thank you, sir, for your enlightening views. Now I invite Mr. Jairam Mamadi to present his views.
Firstly, thank you so much for having me on the panel, and thanks for the elaborate intro. Like Akhil has brought out, I think it has come as a surprise, and the industry as such for operations and logistics was evolving towards technology. But only thing that compounded it, or the pace that has changed or people started adopting, was much, much easier during this pandemic. So I won't look at it as a challenge, but I feel that technology has enabled too many things to happen, and people started absorbing it or maybe adapting to it very fast. So as we are humans, so we have that art of evolution and adoption. So first, I would say it is technology. Second is a lot of empathy, even towards operations. I mean, the whole concept of the topic itself is purpose. So earlier we had too many overheads, we had too many things that we were doing, not exactly doing the core business. So what helped us during this last 2 years is to identify the wastages. I mean, the processes wastages, which we identified, and we could eliminate most of them as people were not coming to offices. So we identified a lot of wastages in the processes where people were doing things which were not really aligned towards the business goals. So third thing I would say is everything we wanted to do ourselves. I was in Mahindra Telecom O&M when the pandemic hit. We were handling a Geo network in 7 states. It was a live network. Then I moved into healthcare during the pandemic. So each organization is always looking at doing things on their own. But I think pandemic has brought in the concept of collaborations. So I think people, too many startups, budding up, solving one small problem, and people trying to leverage their strength to draw win-win situation for both, your business and their business. So I think three things that you mentioned was, one is adoption of technology, two is, identifying the real business goal and eliminating the waste, and three, I would say, would be collaboration.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Prashant Kurganti to present his views.
Thanks, Amit, and thank you for having me part of the panel. I think great question as well. What has changed since the past 2 years? I think 2 words: a lot. I think this pandemic/endemic has kind of shown us that we can work anywhere from the world, especially India. The infrastructure that we have, I think we are ready for remote operations. The focus is moving from being just looking at automation as an option to digital operations. I think that's one key thing that all organizations have looked, from the front to the back office. Closer to my function, I lead the operational excellence team, the team of black belts and master black belts. And we've realized that we can facilitate workshops remotely. We can drive transformation without necessarily being in the same place, same room. In fact, we are driving transformation even when the teams are not in the same time zone. I think co-location as a word has become irrelevant in this situation. And I think it's, when I try to hire a black belt, I don't really look at a location being a constraint. I think that has become a real game changer. On a lighter note, we've never seen so much of collaboration. Jairam brought that up. We have never seen so much of collaboration between the teams. It could be the combined sense of urgency, the empathy towards each other, empathy towards the customers. I think those are some of the things that have really changed in the last 2 years, and a lot of this has got accelerated too. 3 major challenges that at least I see, and I'll try and keep it from a people, process, and technology perspective. We've started getting used to working at home. Sustaining that work at home and hybrid models will be important. It has been challenging. While people work from home, there's no end time. I think that's created a lot of pressure, and a lot of engagement models have also come in. So better engagement models, higher engagement models are of the need. From a process perspective, we were kind of measuring how much time does a person sit in front of a laptop or a computer. I think we moved away from that to saying what are the outcomes that person is delivering. So we have to redefine the operational measures for each of them. And from a technology perspective, I'm sure you would all seen the WhatsApp forwards around who's the chief digital officer in your organization, and the answer is COVID. That has really brought the companies who had a 5-year plan of moving into digital to get down to a 5-month plan. I think those are some of the 3 key challenges that at least we see from an operations perspective on the BPO and the KPO side.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Setu Madhavan to present his views.
Yeah, hi. So I think as some of the speakers have eloquently covered it, I think the pandemic has really made us thought whether we are doing the right things at least. So if you look at a value stream mapping, the way we were doing work earlier and the way we are currently doing, it's really questioned, and that we had to reconfigure some of the business processes. Having said that, I think when this pandemic hit, the first focus for us as an organization was to ensure employee safety. That was the most fundamental pivot on which everything revolved. And then we being in the pharmaceutical industry, also had to serve all the patients, medicines there. So when this happened, we had a drug which was meant for psoriasis, and for which it was called as Alzumab, which was done in 2013. And it so happened that, we got leads that this could be repurposed. Of course, so the drug that was in cold storage, we didn't have any market. We have suddenly had to repurpose, and we had to scale it up in the shortest possible, go to the regulator, convince the regulator, get it to the market. And it was all done in a very short span. And as Prashant and others said, collaboration was something at breakneck speed. Otherwise, you typically had some bit of silos, but everything was broken, and the synergy that existed and the passion that we have to solve, because as COVID is there on you and patients have to be served, and therefore you couldn't have any moment to relax. So we had to reject many of these technologies. We had to find contract manufacturing organizations because we could do some part of it. We needed help from the other part of the other part of the country. So I think at the individual levels, companies are now more focused on operational resilience and also accelerating initiatives that enable more agility. More with this as an organization, we were more of paper based. And as Prashant said, everything has moved. COVID has moved this. Everything accelerated all these by 5 years. And we are deploying more digital ones so that people could be people get remotely connected. Business continuity plans. I mean, earlier you didn't heard this thing of formal structured business continuity plans, alternate vendor developments. And you also said, okay, let's go closer to the market. We're also looking at, okay, if my products have to be served in the US and Europe, I will do some part of my business I will do A here, and B, I could do this so that I'm closer to the market. So geographical de-risking, and so that you ensure that if one part is affected, how can you continue to have supplies from other? So the supply resilience, the overall way the business is conducted has completely changed. So, however, I think as a pharmaceutical company, we said that we will continue to, if we had a very closely knit framework, we also separate other pharmaceuticals. We have, because the remdesivir was needed, we had Alzumab. So we also started supporting one of them. We said we'll operate in this region. So there was great amount of collaboration. So you will find more co-optation now, not competition also. I think we never used to talk to other companies that was earlier we considered as a competitor. But we said, okay, how can we complement your strengths? I think that is what this pandemic has done. And going forward, we'll see a lot more adoption of analytical tools, digital analytics. We will also look at process automation. We will look at, the Google, the way you look at things. We look at digital this thing. There are many digital tools that are going to come in the next 5 years, and it's really going to be an exciting place to work, so that the levels of compliance and also business continuity is enhanced.
Thank you, sir. So, as some of our panelists mentioned about the role of technology in remote work and easy collaborations, so we come to our next question: that what role will technology play in improving the operations or supply chain management in the coming years, especially from an Industry 4.0 perspective? Now, I invite Mr. Akhil to put his views.
Yeah, thanks, Amit. And as I was listening to my co-panelist, it seems the rate of pace of change has increased significantly. So one, obviously for companies who thought technology in a human heavy country, if I may say, with a lot of population, can be forsaken is not the case. I'll give you an example how I will wind it up with how AB InBev did it. So a truck loading takes 8 people. When I go to my folks and say, please use technology, they were like, no, 8 people, it's minimum requirement. Post-COVID, the government mandated a 6 feet distance between each of them, right? That means in a truck, you can only have 4 people. And I have been loading trucks, as simple as that. So there's where it became a necessary evil, I would say, for challenging beliefs that things could be done faster, better, and more efficiently. That's how COVID, I would say, is a blessing. Yes, it has its own consequences, obviously. That's one. So the rate of pace has doubled, tripled, or multifolded. The second, as connecting from my first thought processes, there are 3 V's I would like to say: volume, velocity, and variability. These 3 V's have been significantly challenged across countries and across companies, whether it's vaccination volumes, whether it's vaccinations velocity of immunization of people, whether it's the variability across places, right? So these 3 V's have been significantly impacted by advent of technology, and good to see that people are adopting to newer ways of thinking and providing more efficient business, not just from cost perspective, but also being future ready. That what if there's another black swan event which is more magnifying than this? Are we resilient? So I would say the pace or rate of pace has changed multifolds for technology adoption in any industry and any company in any industry for that matter.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Jairam to present his views.
My take would be like the space is already there. there are companies which were adapting to technologies before this pandemic hit. I think those are the ones who survived the pandemic. And this technology thing has really differentiated the enablers and disablers. Like an organization not ready to adapt to technology are like struggling to survive the pandemic. So technology is here to stay. And as they say, it's a Moore's law. I think if somebody has heard, the size of the chip reduces and the volume of use increases in a squared law. So this thing has squared so fast with 4G, 5G network and all kind of apps and tools, getting available. Technology is the future, and operations will entirely depend on technology. Like I was handling a O&M network. Location of my field people was important. I was heading a workforce of almost 10,000 people. And before this pandemic, it was not very important to know where they are. And unlike the medical field, we are also active contributors during the pandemic because everything was happening on the network. Even now, I think we are all in a seminar or Sapience because we have this enability of 4G or 5G networks in a handheld device, which used to be a huge PC about 6 years ago. So in these 6 years, things have moved, and they are moving at a pace which as a human mind, we are not able to even imagine. So this is going to go even faster, I would say, and it is going to exponential kind of growth. So technology is the one which will enable the organizations, businesses, survivability, everything. Somebody mentioned analytics. Analytics now I think changed the phase into AI and ML. Everybody in every field talks about AI. So I think they are here to stay, and one must be now, if not tech savvy, then you are not here to stay.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Prashant to put forth his views on this topic.
Yeah, and a very pertinent question here from a technology perspective, because like Jairam said, we are here because of the technology. We are on a virtual platform because of technology. And I look at technology from two elements. One, that enables the customers to do business with us, which makes sure that we get the revenue coming in, revenue flowing in. Companies have not been able to get onto a digital platform, probably have perished or have looked at losses. The second element that I would look at is an employee perspective as well. The kind of collaboration tools that we currently see, you take any example of a collaboration tool, Zoom, for example, or Microsoft Teams, for example, the amount of growth that they have seen is tremendous. It was unforeseen. Companies who have been successful in delivering business outcomes have done so because of the collaboration tools that exist. Be it being on conference calls, be it on workshops or brainstorming sessions. How well have we collaborated? How well have we leveraged the technology tools that are available for collaborations have made them successful? I look at technology on those two lenses, Amit.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Setu Madhavan to present his views on this topic.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned in my listing, the technology is really going to be the next lever. I mean, if as many panelists have echoed, if you don't have this, the business is not going to take off. The business is going to be put at risk at least there. So we are also, in fact, traditionally we have manufacturing records. We had the traditional paper-based. We are also looking at electronic batch records. We are looking at sensor. I mean, how can you in fact get real-time data embedded into our system, sir? Say, for example, in the API, we have in the pharmaceutical, you have the small molecules and you have the biologics. In the small molecules, at least space, you have a lot of labor arbitrage because that's the way the industry. But biologics is a little high skill, and it's also geographically diverse. So people are more tech savvy, and they really have to learn many things because because these are made from live cells. And you have multiple work streams like a clinical trial. And today, during the pandemic, we're not able to do the clinical trial. So we found how novel ways of how we can recruit patients, because any product, of course, the small molecules, you know that the product that is made is good enough because it's a synthetic one. But if you make the same from a biological route, you will have from some organism, an E. coli based organism will have a different one, and we would have a different one. So in that sense, you need all the support in terms of clinical trials. You need all, I would say, remote working tools like, wearable sensors, because you're making vials and cartridges, and it is all injected into the bloodstream. And in order to ensure that, and one side people are not able to come, you need the social distancing, as my colleagues mentioned. Therefore, what do you do? How do you bridge this gap? And therefore, the ability to use more of technology, more of sensors, more of remote learning, I think that is where I think the technology needs to be upped. And we, of course, as mentioned, as my colleague Prashant also mentioned, the Zoom calls and other things. And more often, I don't think the online consultations with doctors, this was not something that was in practice. But last 2 years, you found telemedicine and the way we did our clinical trials is something that I never knew that this could happen in this way. So I think technology is going to be a key differentiator. If you either we shape up or shape out, I think that's the way it is going to be happening.
Thank you, sir. So crucial is the role of technology currently, and it will be more so in the coming years. Some of our panelists mentioned about being resilient, supply chain and resilience. So our next question pertains to that. We hear so much about supply chain disruptions because of the pandemic. So how does your organization plans to deal with such a challenge in future? I invite Mr. Akhil to put his views.
So as I heard panelists, and as we are all seeing, right, every supply chain is adapting. Every supply chain is thinking newer ways to service the demand, reach the consumer at the optimal cost, because undertaking here is everyone works for profit, so profitably, as well as looking and envisioning how we can grow the business, as is the objective of any business. However, one thing which has fundamentally transformed is also consumers' approach towards a particular brand or a company during these times, right? Convenience, yes, is critical. And hence every company is now looking for an e-commerce gateway, looking for home delivery, looking for, 15 minutes deliveries as an example. The question thus comes is, how efficiently and profitably will you be able to capture this demand? Because it needs to be sustainable, right? And hence, I would say for me in particular as ABI, we look forward to be servicing consumers the best experience, which is, we call ourselves as a company with experience, more cheers and more trust. But at the same time, we want to be making it A, sustainable, B, profitable. So those are the two levers under which any decision we take are being undertaken for maintaining a loyal customer base, as well as providing the best experience to our consumers.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Jairam to present his views on this question.
Yeah, I think resilience, I would say, as a company, one needs to understand the changing dynamics of the, consumer. There is a lot of unpredictability towards, the behavior of consumer. So I see there is a requirement to capture a lot of data and put it into some analytics, to build in some predictable models such that, you have measures in place to be resilient. To be resilient, I would say a lot of companies, even ours now, is investing too much on tools to identify shortfalls, tools to identify time lags, not exactly those tools which help an individual to work, but tools to identify, where we are falling short. So I would say my take would be, for resilience, one need to look at identifying shortfalls so that they become resilient.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Prashant to put his views on this question.
From a supply chain perspective, in a BPO, KPO kind of an environment, if you think about who are the resources, the human resources are the most critical for us. And I think the world has really changed, considering that we can't do in-person hiring. So we moved from in-person hiring to virtual hiring and the virtual onboarding. So that's a big change. The second thing, obviously, is that we've started cross-skilling people to make sure that we are able to meet the crests and troughs in terms of the volumes that come in. So that's a big thing again that we've changed. Secondly, while we have people who are working from home, and if you recall, we were kind of the entire country got shut down in a matter of hours. So some companies took a matter of days and weeks or months to kind of move from a complete in-office setup to a virtual office setup. So in that, speed was the utmost importance. And as we kind of look at the amount of time it will take us back to get to work in an office kind of setting is going to take some time. So we need to make sure that while we have people working in, they have the right infrastructure, a sustainable and a reliable infrastructure to work from home. For example, it could be dual monitors, it could be UPS for routers. And it's also important to, and we realize that as well, that it's important to note that all employees don't have a workplace at home. I mean, they have probably a 2 BHK, 1 BHK that they're working from. So imagine, you're taking a voice call or a video call with your family around. The features that some of these collaboration tools give, virtual backgrounds, noise suppression, I think they have really enabled us to be sustainable work from home kind of a setup. So those are things that I feel that there were supply chain disruptions, the technology came in to help us out. And last but not the least, I mean, a lot of our organizations work in areas where there is sensitive data that we kind of handle. So having a robust information security tool is also the need of the hour, and technologies have adopted to those which probably were not necessarily a must-have, but have become a must-have in this kind of a situation. So those are certain things from a supply chain disruption and how we've kind of dealt with those challenges, and something that we still keep on evolving as we kind of continue to move into work from home structure.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Madhavan to put his views on this question.
So I think the demands, of course, on risk mitigation will also drive companies to seek more transparency across the value chain. And typically in the pharmaceutical, we need to validate the vendors. Whoever we supply with is a vendor qualification. Earlier, typically, a vendor qualification used to happen. We have to go visit, and also for an FDA for approval, he had to inspect the facility. Now, with all these coming up with remote, and what the FDA has said, it's gone for a hybrid approach because of travel unavailability. They said we can do hybrid ones, we can do a remote audit. And what this has essentially done is, of course, it has enabled us to not only look at alternate source, but we're also trying to see how much more we can do online. Suppose there's a desktop audit, we try to do even for the vendors, we also do a desktop. So this has opened up a lot more suppliers in our network, which we never used to look at earlier. I mean, we used to go with a single vendor or two vendors. So these have essentially, opened up new vistas for us in terms of not only cost reduction, but it has also enabled us to see how we can have continuity of business. And even for an auditing or a product release, now it can be done remotely. If somebody has a laptop, and if all, of course, as my colleague mentioned, information security is the key in here, because anything that goes, it can be a catastrophic for the business. So in my opinion, we need to be agile, especially in product transfers. When you do a tech transfer, we are also in collaboration. Now we are looking at prophylactic measures. Now, COVID, suppose one is the vaccine element that has been done. But we're also looking at, governments like Singapore, which is a small country, 5 million population. They want to take prophylactic medicines. They want to take monoclonal antibodies, which will prevent them. So we have also tried to source product transfers, do tech transfers from, different companies in the US, and use our platform because we have capacities here. We look at how to adapt those technologies to serve patients in this region. So all in all, what has been done is, in terms of supplier, we look at product transfers, we look at new equipment approval, validation, remote monitoring for site quality. All this has got, and of course, as I said, the adoption of electronic batch record. I think this is all enable us to be resilient. And we're also trying to evaluate the workforce. Of course, the workforce will also have to be tech savvy, in the sense they have to get enabled in terms of remote learning, in terms of new apps that enables them to turn. So in all, the supply chain has completely got rejigged, and not only from a technology perspective, but also from a geographical way, the geographical identification of vendors. So I think this is the new norm. Earlier, we used to supply for Malaysia. When I was in Malaysia, we used to supply all the materials from India. But now once we started having, because there was no travel. And when I remember when the pandemic happened, petroleum prices, of course, in Malaysia was much, much lower. If I have to count, it is about 30 rupees. It fell to as low as 10, 12 rupees. I mean, there was all tankers were at standstill. Nothing moved. That was the kind of disruption that happened. And if you see on that day, the first time when this pandemic hit, it was really, really heart-wrenching to see this could be the impact of COVID, at least. And now, of course, we've adopted and found ways and means to adapt. But I think this is going to be an important component in terms of having sites geographically de-risked, just not put all your eggs in one basket, because we would definitely, I think the world will not be the same after this, at least, in that sense.
Thank you, sir. As Mr. Akhil mentioned that for any organization, sustainability and profitability are the key drivers. And as Mr. Madhavan just mentioned, that identification of new suppliers is one of the ways to do that. So continuing from that, our next question comes is, what are the growth strategies that you look forward to from operations perspective post-pandemic? I invite Mr. Akhil to put his views.
Yeah, I would say those two levers, as I said, sustainability and profitability are the key for any company's growth forward. Now, in order to enable, there could be several enablers. One could be a technology, which we have discussed in the previous thoughts. One could be capability and capacity building, because generally, if you look, most of us who are here on the call would have either consumed or relied very heavily on inputs from China, whether it's a chip, whether it's barley or malt or anything else in my organization, or a syringe in a medical profession, because China was the cheapest source of supply. And by the way, it still remains same. However, the fundamental is also availability, not only cost. And hence, companies have started retrenching the thought of globalization to something called as make in India, or for that matter, make in America, and things like those, right? Where the cost levers are higher, right? But at least the availability becomes an important lever for it. And hence, I would say the growth strategy would be FAV, which is freshness, available, and visible. I would say visibility has been more or less taken care by the e-commerce segment, wherein now the shelf screen or shelf space is same for every company, or which is your laptops or your handsets. But then availability and freshness becomes equally important levers for everyone. And hence, capability development, whether it's infrastructure, production, manufacturing, will start picking up. Because eventually, and I'm not breaching this concept here, but there's something called as a smiley curve, wherein manufacturing for years was considered to be lowest value added thing. There are the right sides of the value add, which is one is R&D, and then there's sales and marketing. Manufacturing is on the bottom of that smiley curve. Curve is going to start becoming flatter and flatter, which means manufacturing levers, companies, there were some like Zetwork, Mooglex, and all those which are coming up, are on that ground because there is spare capacity. Let's start deploying these capacities to build things here so that they're available when time is needed. Just to round it off, we all know how ocean freights have been working. And eventually, if I make something at a cost base which is cheaper, maybe getting it here is more costlier than the cost of the product.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Jairam to put his views on this question.
I would talk about growth strategy in terms of agility, adaptability, and adaptability. So to have the growth strategy in place, I feel there has to be more mean, not pyramidic kind of thing, but lateral kind of structures, which needs to be respected with the changing mindset of, the people. As somebody was calling, and I read an article on great resignation wave, which is going around. In order for the company to have a growth strategy, I believe that you need to create space to individual and start identifying each individual rightly, and everybody should be given a place to contribute and take ownership of the thing. So if you are looking at growth and purpose driven organization at the loss of profits, I mean reduction in profits, looking at purpose and making people their priority should be the things to fall in place to have growth as a strategy.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Prashant to present his views on this question.
From a growth strategy perspective, I think companies will have to get to an end-to-end solutions for what the customer is looking for. And when I say end-to-end solutions, it has to be packaged like a product. It could be customer service as a contact center as a service, or a claims as a service, RCM, revenue cycle management as a service. That's the way that we'll have to go in. And that service includes technology plus the enabling operations that go behind it. So that's how I think companies will have to look out from a growth strategy perspective. It has to be packaged like a product. It could be customer service as a contact center as a service, or a claims as a service, RCM, revenue cycle management as a service. That's the way that we'll have to go in. And that service includes technology plus the enabling operations that go behind it. So that's how I think companies will have to look out from a growth strategy perspective.
Thank you. I invite Mr. Madhavan to put his views.
I think, in my opinion, the sustainability will be how do you build on your recycle capability. So typically, in a API industry, you generate quite a lot of waste, and given that you can't dispose them, because even for a disposal, you had many vendors, and with vendors, supply chain also disrupted. You will have to look at technologies of how to recycle them, and by doing this, what you essentially do is you also reduce your carbon footprint. Typically, you have solvents, you have more of carbon footprint when you set it outside. If you're trying to recycle and then reposition it, I think that is going to be a major game changer. And also with environmental sustenance governance coming and adding a lot more impetus now, I think that you will have more technologies which will be for recycle, more technologies which are more towards digital and more towards analytics. I think this is the way the sustainability can come, at least in an industry that I am operating. We will see a lot more learning of AI, a lot more recycle, a lot more repurposing of drugs. And we also look at the device space. Typically, what happens is you have a drug delivery, like an insulins or anything. You have a device, you have a vial, which is more straightforward. You have a drug, you have a pen, which is like you have a cartridge, which is inside a device. So today there are multiple options. You have disposable pens, you have reusable pens. So I think how you adopt this, how you can recycle, because you're not going to get pens easily also. So the way it will happen is if you're able to recycle it, then at least we will be in a position to deliver them to the patients. And being at the patient-centric organization, I think this is where technologies, supply chain, and also how we can embrace new technologies. I think this is going to be the next growth driver, according to me.
Thank you, sir. As you mentioned about the technology of recycling, we come to our next question, which is due to increased use of technology and the resulting carbon footprint, what sustainability initiatives do you look forward to engage in the coming years? I invite Mr. Akhil to put his views.
Thanks, Amit. This is a very important question and a pertinent point, right? Because of late, I have seen several startups, several companies, and several geographies talking of climate change. Right now, it's not that climate change happened today; it has been since years, but that it has put rhythm in terms of focus from people, especially those who are sitting in NCR like you, where the air quality index 10 days ago was so difficult that I had to cancel my ticket to Gurgaon, right? So I could have done it because I'm based in Bangalore, but those who were in Gurgaon, you are in Gurgaon, right? You don't move your bases because air quality has changed. Unless you are uber rich, that people have moved to New Zealand for the time being, which some people did, by the way. Now, to circle it out, what I'm saying is sustainability, hence, not just on the wake of it saying we are sustainable and put a banner on your chest and say I'm a sustainable company. No, it has to come from each one of us, just like safety comes in with each one of us, because there's only one earth. I don't have another home. I can not go anywhere else, right? So for in that lever, I believe ABI has taken a lot of steps, not just pledging to UN SDG goals, but also actually deploying. We have a ESG officer by name XG who is leading it. We are looking at a lot of circular packaging. So glass is one of the important product for us because beer is generally sold in bottles, and we are looking at improving our return rates so that I can reuse those bottles. We are looking at a lot of greenhouse related reduction when we are doing a barley product program, which is smart agriculture. We are looking at HL per HL water consumption, right, in terms of our brewery footprints, and hence also monitoring the end-to-end global distribution systems, which gives me how much CO2 per kilometer is what I have emitted in that entire operation, right? Now, the last one is a very big scale. It's dependent on several other suppliers and companies, because just I saying I'm carbon neutral or positive is not the way how it happens. It has to be through the value chain. I think that is a long process, but the first step is to figure out what is controllable. And for us, one thing which is controllable is to recycle glass, to recycle aluminum, to conserve water, and to be more compliant in overall emissions. And that's what we have taken a step. We are very, very committed as a company. And I particularly, as the supply chain head, is committed to look into all this and have a better tomorrow for us. Now, better does not mean it happens tomorrow by me alone. So I urge everyone on this call, 184 participants, to pledge that we will really make a change in sustainability. Not just say, okay, today I saved something and hence it's sustainable. It's not going to happen like that.
Thank you, sir. We make a pledge, and it seems a lot of excellent initiatives you are working on. Now I invite Mr. Jairam to please come and put his views.
I think I more or less agree with Akhil, and all of us should pledge. Maybe we should all get into, this green effect thing kind of thing as our second nature, switching off lights, fans, everything starts with a small step. More than, leaving a footprint, I would say it is the wastage that, leaves footprints. So too much of electronic waste I see around these days. I'm into a company which is into defense R&D, and we have electronics, a lot of electronic waste and all. So now we have liaised with one company in Hyderabad who are doing the electronic waste disposal. I think a lot of awareness has to be brought in with regard to what kind of organizations exist, and how we can leverage their strengths to reduce the footprint. It is not only generating footprint, it is how you clean the footprint also. So I would look at both sides, that each individual should become a responsible citizen and think of the future for the country or the globe as such. Not to generate footprint should be the first attempt, and in case a very weak or mild footprint is also generated, you should know how to clean that footprint. So I would say that it has to be a two-sided effort to reduce the footprint and also to clean the footprint.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Prashant to put his views.
I completely agree with Akhil and Jairam, especially the fact that Jairam mentioned about the awareness part. I think a lot of us, even closer home, forget about office space. I mean, how many of us actually do waste segregation? I mean, I live in an apartment complex, which is about 1,200 odd families. We don't really segregate waste. And there are startups and companies which actually have their business models around that. we don't have awareness on that. So that's, closer home. From an office perspective, from a company perspective, there are a lot of initiatives, a slew of initiatives that we are doing on paperless. In any kind of healthcare company, you get bills, you get claims which are paper based. So there are a lot of push towards digital, and one of the outcome would be paperless for sure. On a lighter note, because of the pandemic, the amount of travel has significantly come down. I mean, I would normally visit, Gurgaon or the US a couple of times a year. I mean, that is completely gone now. So that in itself has really helped us reduce the emissions in the world. So I think it's awareness is definitely something that we should all kind of look at each and every opportunity of trying to see how we can reduce the paper usage that we have, the e-wastage usage that we have. I think that's something that we should look at.
Thank you. I invite Mr. Madhavan to put his views on this question.
I think many of the speakers have already echoed it. Of course, at least in our closer home, we do segregate waste in Bangalore at least. They were quite strict in that we have to have the red, green, and that segregation has already taken place, and also avoidance of plastic. That is something that is even when I go to a shop, I very consciously take the bag. I don't want to take plastic. So I think that awareness has got created, and there is also punitive measures that the government has done. So that is really energized. But closer to work, I think, as I mentioned, we do recycle a lot of solvents. Whatever we do, as much as possible, we try to make a zero liquid discharge. Essentially, meaning whatever plants are, whatever water is generated, even from effluent, we try to see that how we can kind of recycle it back. Even for our boiler generations, if we have a certain amount of water, we test it. We try to see whether we can repurpose it. So these are things that we are trying to go, and so that we are able to reduce our carbon footprint and build sustainable technologies. Earlier, we used to have a certain way. Okay, this can be this thing, but now the norm is whatever if you're doing a batch process, can we make it continuous, because your ecological footprint is coming down. So everything is being questioned. I think what this has essentially done is, like the extra years where we could do everything taken for granted. You need to at least think through what's going to happen, given that you might not have someone who's going to take your waste, or you might have other disruption. How can we recycle? How we can have everything which is controllable within us? So I think this kind of technologies is going to also get the fillip in the coming days at least. So with this, I will hand it over back to Dr. Amit.
Thank you, sir. Recycling is also one of the ways to cut on the costs. So coming from that, coming to our next question, given that revenues took a hit post-pandemic for most businesses, what strategies of cost management do you look forward to employ or plan to implement? I invite Mr. Akhil to put his views.
So Amit, I gave an example, and it was one simple example, right? 8 people needed to fill a truck. I challenged for 4 years, nothing moved. One COVID came and 4 people because of social distancing, right? So some things are necessary and some things are, thrust upon us, if I may say that word, right? So it was necessary through COVID to relook the time motion study, to relook how effectively and efficiently can we deliver the same work which we are doing 5 years ago, which means, to be practical, the flab across the waste of supply chain has been eliminated. In the lean process, we call it warm pit, right? So the entire warm pit process has been reconsidered, rechristianed, and now it's called efficiency, right? Every angle of the supply chain was looked. How many more pallets can you load in a truck? How many less people can be deployed for safety reason, not for cost alone, right? How effectively can I move to the next levers of command? Given all that, and especially mind it, I was selling Corona that time, right? We sell a brand called Corona. So it's very, very imperative for us to be responsible, sustainable, and have a lever of understanding, chop, if I may say, to deliver same and better result. Cost is one lever of it. Value of human life is second lever of it. Resilience is third lever of it. And eventually all that for growth and profitability. So I would say these were the 5 drivers which we have done, and we delivered higher volume than last year. I'm sure by the exit of this year, we will be back to 2019 scenario. That means, assuming that flab is gone, you are a leaner, meaner, and a more efficient machine. So it's supply chain in every company has become a more leaner, more stronger, and more effective, resilient machine.
Thank you, sir.
And that's going to drive the profitability for businesses going forward.
True. I invite Mr. Jairaman to put his views on this question.
Yeah, I request Dr. Amit to repeat the question. I think I lost the audio.
Sure. So given that revenues took a hit post-pandemic, what strategies of cost management do you look forward to employ or implement?
I feel, there's a study which talks about changing working hours, having about reducing 5 days a week to 4 days a week, work from home, convenience of the employee, a lot of things is being talked about. So if you are looking at reducing the cost and increasing the profitability, I think you need to understand the psychological changes that are happening because of this pandemic. That is one thing which needs to be looked at, that how we leverage it to maybe increase your force but reduce their working hours. So I feel that instead of full-time, there is a lot of people who are looking at part-time, freelance. So one thing is, on people, you need to look at how do you leverage this changing mindset and optimize it for your own organizational growth. That is one. Second would be processes. I have already mentioned that we have worked too much on identifying the waste and cutting down on those processes, which also results in reducing your OPEX and then increasing your bottom line. And I think Akhil also talked about volumes. Definitely with efficient processes, the volumes have to go up. I mean, I don't see any reason why volume goes down when you are being more efficient. And third thing I would say is use of technology. Again, I would bring that forward because technology as such, enables a lot of inefficiencies to be removed in the system. So how you align this people, process, and technology would, build your strategy for reducing your OPEX and increasing your bottom lines.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Prashant to put his views on this question.
Yeah, productivity is a very tight rope or a thin rope walk. You drive more productivity, you have a challenge in terms of employee burnouts or quality issues. I think productivity has to be seen in that context. At least what we saw initially was that we had huge increase in productivity levels. And what we realized is, when people are working from home, they forget to take breaks. They forget that, they have a job from 9 to 5 and they need to end their shift at 5 o'clock. They would kind of continue till 7 o'clock. Unknowingly, that is what we've seen. So one was for us to be able to make sure that we reduce the burnout. So that was one thing that we did. Second, productivity, you can drive so much through process improvement, through lean, by reducing waste in the processes. There has to be at some point of time technology interventions. I think that is something that we kind of do year on year. There are targets that we look at. We look at how do we reduce cost. And the other thing that we also realized is it's not just about people costs. There are IT infrastructure costs that you can also reduce. There are a lot of initiatives that we are driving, which kind of says, how do we move towards cloud? How do we reduce the redundant servers? How do we kind of optimize the space on some of the data servers? How do we optimize our data centers? So those are certain things that we've also driven to reduce costs and hence improve profitability. So not just people costs, there are a lot of other costs that we look at to drive productivity at an organization level to improve our margins. And we looked at all those elements.
Thank you, sir. A lot of pertinent points. Now I invite Mr. Madhavan to put his views.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we trying to do is, earlier being a pharmaceutical industry, we do our annual maintenance equipment. We have high-speed machines for which we need vendors to come from abroad. Given the pandemic, we didn't have many of them coming in. So what we did was we used remote support. With the help of remote support, we used to connect to the vendor there and see how we can do it internally. Earlier, as my speaker said, something was nice to have or must to have. So they used never used to venture into that area. But when there was no option and we had to take, we started, it not only gave an opportunity for people to rethink and also learn new skills, but also enable to cut costs. If the vendor had to come, we had to pay huge amounts of money because it's a foreign vendor and we had to pay. So the maintenance, the way we take support from the vendor, those are all things. And travel has been a major component because, as one of the co-panelists said, that we said our budget was 100 crores, we only spent 90 crores. We saved 90 crores. So that was the thing. So travel cost, all these have come significantly. And what now people are investing is in IoTs and digital twins. We are looking at manufacturing execution system, how we can use all these manufacturing execution to industry 4.0, so that we can reduce more and more of people. So, and this will enable, because, and with the social distancing norms also coming in, so we have to see how we can use AIs and other, so that the workspace is optimal and still we don't run the risk of COVID. So my take would be, we will have highly skilled knowledge workforce, which will also reduce the amount of workers that we have, and also will enable cross skilling. So today you have a certain workforce that is ideal, you might repurpose into the market. Not all the machines run at 100% peak loads. So you might find people who are cross-trained, who will be repurposed there. So that is the way we repurpose the entire organization. And we have reduced significantly the manpower. I mean, typically earlier norm was, okay, you get, because if you have manpower, you need a seating space for them. Given the COVID restriction, you have a certain one, you can't do that. So we're looking at, if this is what it is, how can we supplement technology and reduce manpower? And then what this essentially does is also reduces human errors and also deviations and so on and so forth. So I think that is the way that we have looked at the post-pandemic. And we see that there are a lot of economies of scale and cost saving that are taking, and which will be passed on to the customers as well.
Very pertinent points, Mr. Madhavan. Thank you. Operations as a field is never independent of human behavior. The field of behavioral operations is dedicated on this topic. So our next question is, what change did you observe in human behavior post-pandemic while engaging in operations processes or supply chain management? And how did you deal with it or plan to deal with it? I invite Mr. Akhil to answer this question.
To me, Amit, it really opened a gap in human civilization, right? For all of us, including the students who are listening to this webinar, right? Every one of us wants higher package, better designation, more money, right? I think 2019, we have now in 2021 seen the area of great resignations. People are moving away from there. People are saying, okay, money is important. It is not the only thing. Life is, and more than life, mental health is. And hence, I believe we all have been looking at skillfulness, which institute to go, which extra course to do, what extra new technology to learn. I did it for 40 years in my life, to be very frank, and I continue upskilling myself. But then I think the bigger focus which has opened up, and as one of our panelists was saying, the the distance between or the line or boundary between personal and professional life, work from home versus work at home, right? Things like those have evolved a concept which is mindfulness. I think that Maslow's hierarchy, which we all are being taught in our MBA schools, right? That basic social status, and then eventually looking to self-actualization. I don't think we'll ever reach self-actualization, most of us. Otherwise, we'll be Buddhas and Gandhis. But then at least the needs wherein we are now saying there's a balance. It cannot be only about one thing. It cannot be only about money. It cannot be only about materialistic pleasures. It's about mental challenge. It's about mindfulness. So I would say it's a balance now from skillfulness for materialistic gains to a mindfulness for a holistic human-centric approach. And that's what has changed in the last 2 years. So practice yoga if you have not done. I think that's becoming a vogue.
True, sir. Thank you. I invite Mr. Jayaraman to put his views.
I would take on from yoga. I think it should be meditation over yoga, and I mean, on the lighter sense. But yes, I think people have realized their needs, right? During this pandemic, people were on shopping sprees because of this online e-commerce, but how many got to wear them was the question, which was straight on the face of each individual. So they have realized, I think, the potential, what Akhil was mentioning, that what are our needs, I think, and how much time are we spending to earn our needs, to balance with the family. So in an organization where, I had about these people in the field who are looking after the towers and, OFCs. So they are from, I would say, weaker socioeconomic backgrounds. So there was a time when, as an organization, I was working for Mahindra then, and Mahindra, I would say with pride, it is a people's company. I mean, they, as a culture, they always placed people above the, profits. So one good thing I have seen there was anybody, falling sick because of COVID, they paid them the salary, they paid their hospital bills, and, held their hands. So I think we have earned a lot of loyalty among our employees, though there is this great resignation wave going on. But we also realized, what are the needs of our people. And it's the time, I think, we need to be more human and understand each other's needs. Maintaining the psychological, emotional balance is at the front, at least now. And I would say it will be here to stay at least for next 3-4 years. After that, again, we are humans and we will start chasing those, business goals and financial goals. But at least for next 2-3 years, people also will have this mindset of, balancing with family, and organizations also will have the empathy towards their employees. But I'm not sure, it's too early to say that how long it will last, because we all have short-term memories. The moment we are over this, we will be chasing again, I suppose. So I leave it as a thought to all of us here, that are we going to chase soon, or are we going to, make this work-life balance?
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Prashant to present his views.
I'll kind of start with what Jairam kind of alluded towards. I think as people, we've had higher levels of empathy across the value chain. Be it leaders, be it managers, they were more understanding of what their employees were going through, and the employees, what the bosses were going through, or the managers or the leaders were going through. I think every one of us, and I'm sure someone or the other in the family or friends, has been touched by COVID. And I think organizations have really taken care of those people, from starting from making sure that their tests are covered, the hospitalization is covered in the event of unfortunate death, full amounts being, kind of provided, a lot of support being provided to the families, spouses getting jobs. I think a lot of these organizations have done. I think I wouldn't want to single out any organization that has not done it. I think that's one. The second thing is, at least for me, majority of my team members are remote. I think not just my team members, I've also have come to know about their family members. I've spoken to the wives, I've spoken to the spouses, in the time of need, and they have spoken to my spouse, my wife as well. I think it was a virtual connects. I think that has definitely increased. The empathy has definitely gone up. And I think to Jairam's point, we'll have to see how much does this empathy last. I think we were all on the same boat. That was one. And not just the employees, but also the customers understood what each one of us were going through. And I can, give an example where, in an unfortunate death of one of our fellow employee, the customers actually did crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, and provided support, medical support and family support as well. I think these are things that we probably would not have imagined. And So those are things that we've seen from a human behavior change point. Across the value chain, there's been definitely a lot of empathy that has gone up. We just need to see how long does it sustain.
True, sir. Thank you. Empathy is what unites us as a family. I will invite Mr. Madhavan to put his views.
I think most of the speakers have limpidly covered this. I think one of the things that I can say from my own example is my wife was working for a IT company, IBM. And when I wanted to relocate to Malaysia just before the pandemic came, she said she wants to do yoga and she wanted to be a stay. And she never did yoga for the last 20 years. And I said, okay, what it is? Okay, she started doing the course and within 2 months she covered. And then she said, I want to do corporate wellness. And then it so happened that the pandemic struck. And then she started taking yoga classes across the globe and she felt very good. I mean, the amount of the accolade that she received was something she said, okay, she said, I want to do only this thing. And she wanted to go into corporate wellness, I think, which is what rightly chimed with what many of the speakers said, like the mental health there. But now she's doing pretty well. And I think this going forward, it is not about money, perquisites or titles. It's about how you feel happy. I mean, are you in a good space or a zone? I think that is the one that will define rather than how much bank balance or what it is. I think the trend is going towards minimalism and not maximization. You see, you want to get materialist, this, that. I think that the world is going, seeing COVID, they want to say minimalism. I think that will be the one. And also, in addition to that, Biocon as a company, also we also lost, unfortunately, 14 employees, especially in the wave 2. Very unfortunate. I think we did support their families in whatever way possible, the children, because many people were in mid-30s where they lost their children. So Kiran, as a person said we will educate them till they reach the age of 25. So a lot of empathy came. And we also, in fact, as many of the speakers, we also networked with their families. There were many people who didn't have oxygen. And we found ways and means of how we can supply. I mean, I've spoken to CEOs, if my former colleague was there, I've spoken to CEOs, and I could see the empathy that was coming across, especially during the wave 2. So I think this is here to stay, but I think how long is something that we'll have to, it's a moot point. I mean, I would rather wait. If this is going to be the endemic, then this will stay. But if this is going to close, then you might know how it's going to pan out. That's the way I would say position it.
Thank you, sir. We are falling short of time. We'll just take one question from the students. There's one question from Shubham Jadli. He asks that in post-pandemic endemic scenario, are we witnessing a transition trend from linear supply chains to circular supply chains on global level, as companies are now focusing more on circularity instead of conventional supply chain method? So anybody from the 4 panelists can answer this.
I can take it up.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, yes, Shubham, fundamentally, every company is redefining, redesigning, and redeploying its supply chains, right? And for that matter, companies will explore to any extent in terms of whether it's linear or it's related supply chains. I mean, there's a gradation in supply chain. There's something called a supply chain at level 1 of maturity to a level 4 of maturity. I believe most supply chains in India, barring a couple of them, would be between level 1 and level 2, those who are reactive. The others would be between 2 and 3, which are more towards responsive but not resilient, right? And hence, in the time frame, there's a lot of circularity which will happen. And by circularity, what I understand from you is, how closely linked you are with your suppliers, with your consumers, and can you do a lot of reverse logistics and things like those? Because eventually, being linear is not what will give you feedbacks on real time from your consumers and customers. And hence, it's important to have levers of placement, promotion through deploying circularity as a supply chain mechanism. As I said, in our AB InBev world, we do a lot of reverse logistics. We do a lot of sustainability and circular packaging, which we call through glass bottles. That is to really figure out how much is the demand sensing, because if my bottle is empty, which means tertiary or consumption has happened, right? So I'm able to deduct from there forecast accuracy, demand sensing, and hence preemptively deploy promotions for doing a demand phasing as well as demand creation in the market. And hence circularity is not only cost sensitive, it's also about the V of volume, which I told, and the V of variability and the V of velocity, which we can gauge from there.
Thank you, sir. We'll just take one last question from Ronak Goenka. He has asked a couple of questions. I think many of his questions are answered. One question is, what are your views on the increasing Indian exports and what opportunities and challenges it brings for the operations and logistics?
I think in my mind, of course, the supply chain. See, if you have a cold chain storages, I think the infrastructure needs to be really spruce up a bit, because pre-pandemic we didn't have so much of vaccine movement across the globe, and now with so much of vaccine movement, I think one of the major things where India is now exporting to many countries is where cold stone storages. How is it that it can be more competitive? Because if you don't have the right cold storages, the patients who are receiving it will not be assured that there is the quality built in that. So in my mind, of course, exports is very healthy, but I think the infrastructure and the government support is needed in order to ensure that this sustains.
Thank you, sir. So I believe there has been a lot of learning for the last 1.5 hours from our esteemed panelists. At least I have learned a lot. With this, the panel discussion comes to an end. Over to Midam now.
We now request Professor Prashant to deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
It's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of the Great Lakes Institute. The discussion was really lively and a great learning for all the 190 plus participants in various areas. Thanks to Amit, because he structured in such a fashion, a large number of issues were tackled one after another in a very focused manner. And before I thank the individual members, I like to sum up the things which have come out very clearly. I'm very happy on that. First of all, the positive attitude of all the panelists. They really converted all the problems into an opportunity. I always saw a positive note in all of them, which is a great thing and great inspiration to the students. Problems welcome. And the term used was, we can. I'm very happy the term was brought out, we can. The difficulties will come, but we can overcome. The positive attitude towards technology. There's another area, acceptance by a large number of people. This has helped to grow, to put up a large number of things. And the concept that we have to live with the live with the pandemic. That means it's not a one-time affair. And I think this was brought out by all the panelists in a very beautiful way. And I'm also happy that Amit very, in a decent manner, covered many other areas also, especially the importance of sustainability, which is an important role of the industry. And I was very happy that the participants talked about the role of yoga and meditation. I'm a very strong supporter of that. And I felt very happy. That means internationally, virtually all the participants spoke in favor of this one for the better quality of life for all of us. And I think we have been able to succeed in many cases also. I think my light is out, but I still continue the word of thanks. The whole things are possible on account of the lot of efforts which are done by Kirti and her team. They did a great work. It was not possible without that, especially when the people are coming from the different cities altogether, with a different background altogether. And it has been managed. The students did a fantastic work. A lot of preparation was required for that. IT team came to our rescue in many areas. They solved all the problems. And I think I'm very happy with the good amount of participation from the faculty as well as the students in a big way. And I'm really thankful to all the panelists who have done a great job. That means thanks to Mr. Setu Mahadevan, Mr. Prashant, Mr. Akhil, and all the participants. It's been a great event. And special thanks to Amit for asking very, very specific questions to bring out the best in the panelists. Thank you very much for all.